Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to our weekly program. This is a very, very special treat because we have two extraordinary people, probably one of the best Kerouac readers any of us have ever heard. And if Jack were here, he'd be thrilled himself because one of his biggest joys was when he called me up one night and he said, I'm in a car and Charles Lawton is reading my words. So Jack actually was a classicist in his heart, and he loved people who could really read the words. If that doesn't sound beat, that's cool because Jack was beatific. And the person I'm speaking of course, is the great Keir Delay, whom you've seen or your parents have seen, and I'm sure you have too, on reruns of 2001. He was the star. He made 27 or more films and stage actors. As a great stage actor, won all kinds of awards all of his life. And he spent formative years in Greenwich Village and in San Francisco when all this stuff was happening. And his wife, Maya Dillon, is also like a monstrously terrific actress who's many, many people in the theater and films have seen for a long, long time. And she's also a wonderful, wonderful reader of Jack Kerouac. So this program, the people who are reading Jack Kerouac will take his words off the paper and thrill you because you'll be able to see the pictures that they're painting in their minds. And of course, Pamela Dickerson, who created the whole idea for this program, is here, as well as Norton Wisdom, a wonderful artist, the brilliant young performer, writer, composer, and our technical wizard, Anthony Demarbiex, and the keeper of Jack Kerouac's scroll, who comes on every week to cheer us up and give us that spirit of what it's all about, Mr. Jim Canary. But we're going to begin with a reading, as we do every week, of Offbeat Collaborating with Kerouac, a book that I wrote, which describes the collaborations that we had together in so many different ways. And this particular part of the book deals with the final time that I was with Jack before he left us. It was really sad to have to say goodbye to him. And as I was last week, I mentioned when I was my dear friend Melanie, when I spoke to her for the very last time, just shortly before he died, I was worried. So I'll just read the last part. She said, okay, Melanie, I said, you're really understanding. And she said, there's not much to understand. All you guys just need to calm down and grow up. If I wanted to be with a dentist, I wouldn't have chosen you. I'm glad you and Jack talked. I know how much you love each other and how much you worry about him. Aren't you glad you spoke and played music with him on the phone? You're the most positive person I've ever met in my life. Why do you look so sad? You guys will get together soon. I hope so, I said, but I don't know. He didn't sound right. He'll be fine, said Melanie. All those ex-football players live forever. I'll see you tonight after I get home from work, and we'll go to Casey's for dinner. A few weeks later, I climbed the stairs of my 6th Avenue apartment and sat down with my lox, cream cheese, tuna fish, onions, Swiss cheese, capers, and horseradish sauce breakfast, lunch special giant sandwich on rye bread that Igor Sidarsky at the Art Foods Delicatessen let me go behind the counter each day and make for myself. I had 3 cups of coffee before starting work, and I turned on the answering machine. Dave, Ted Jones here. No number right now. Did you hear about Jack? I heard him early this morning that Jack died. Have you heard anything more? I didn't bother to check any of my other messages. I didn't bother to check them, and I called the wire service friend where Lucian Carr had been working for years. I had known Lucian for 20 years, and I knew he would know what was happening. I didn't want to call any of Jack's friends in case it was a mistake. I sat down at the piano and I played and I prayed for his soul and said a Kaddish and kissed an old mass card he'd given me in 1957. I could hear his voice fill the room. He always retained the music of his Lowell, Massachusetts accent whenever he spoke. The special sounds of Lowell's Little Canada, a sound that still speaks to my heart every day. The phone rang and I answered. Hey, David, this is Richard Bellamy. I guess you heard the news. He's left us. Richard was the bishop in Pull My Daisy and had a small art gallery in real life and was a great friend to all of us. I imagine they'll have a funeral up in Lowell at the church he was a member of as a boy. I'll go up with you, but I'm afraid it will all just become a public circus, one of those orgies of self-promotion that seems to be the dynamic of the 60s. Can you drive up? I don't know, Richard, I said. I have a concert in Washington, D.C. If it's the same day, I could fly up and fly back afterwards, but I don't know if I want to go there either, especially if it becomes the Beatniks versus the Lowells confrontation. Jack was a devout Catholic. He would want a traditional service. That's why I'm not going, said Richard. I don't want to be there to see people leaping in front of the cameras to have a beatnik circus. I feel terrible loss and compassion for his wife and all those who truly loved him through his whole life. Lucian Carr and Carolyn Cassidy, Joyce Johnson and Dodie Muller must be devastated. Let's all pray for him and keep his memory alive. Now that he's gone, he'll begin to be really appreciated for what he left us all. I never knew anyone like him. Thank you for calling, Richard. You've really helped me out to deal with this, I said. I hung up the phone and it rang again. Old friends from all over the country, Canada, and even some from Europe all called that day and night. Many were crying. I had to cheer them up by telling them the wonderful things in his life that we had done and he had done for countless others, and of all the fun we'd had together. Reporters also called up from around the world. Usually the first questions were, are you the David Amram who played with Jack Kerouac and wrote music for the Beatnik film Pull My Daisy and did compositions with him? Do you think he died from an overdose of drugs? I know this must be a difficult time for you to talk. Can you tell my readers about his beatnik philosophy? Are you the Beat Generation composer named David Amram who worked with Jack Kerouac? And if so, why do you think he killed himself? You have my sincere condolences. Could you give us your thoughts? I was brought up to be respectful to every human being who walks the earth. So I gritted my teeth when the words beatnik and beat generation came before Jack's name. I tried to answer each person in the best way I could. Since each reporter asked me for a statement, I wrote one down and read that to them. I was lucky enough to know him, to be his friend, to work with him, and maintain my friendship with him from the time when we met, and he'll always be in my heart. He was one of the great writers of the English language, and he's yet to be fully appreciated. He will return to his rest in his hometown of Lowell, where he always loved and never forgot. Musicians, poets, painters, actors, and everyday people now have a more inclusive and compassionate world to live in because of what he left us all in his books and in his actions towards other people. Every single reporter then asked me in some form or another one of the following questions. Are you still a beatnik? Why is he no longer the king of the beat generation? Did all you beatniks still advocate free love, drugs, and flag burning? Who will be the new king of the beat generation? I knew if I uttered one curse word or said one sentence that sounded abusive, that would be what ended up in any articles or obituaries. May I read you my statement again slowly? I asked. Perhaps some part of it might be useful in some way and answer some of your questions. I understand you have a job to do and are restricted by a deadline. That won't be necessary, was the universal response. Then the same questions were asked again, and I knew that not one of them had heard one word I said and would not use one word at all. They heard what they wanted to hear. Melanie came home about 6:30 and hugged me for about 5 minutes. I'm sorry, sweetie, she said, but at least he's not in pain anymore. And look at the gift he left the world. Let's watch the news. Melanie turned on my old black and white TV set with the clothes hanger aerial wrapped in tinfoil, and we flipped channels and saw the reports. Somehow, it seemed to make Jack's death more real. The phone kept ringing, and I kept reading my statement and then trying to be polite to the interviewers who needed a few lines to reinforce the hideous slant that their editors were forcing them to pursue to guide their stories. Finally, at 9 p.m., Melody said, "Turn on the answering machine. Let's go to Casey's to celebrate Jack's life." None of these reporters can possibly use anything you're saying. They want blood and guts, beatniks with berets and bongos. Now that the so-called hippie revolution has turned out to be a disaster and is no longer in fashion, they have to find something else to dump on. Maybe they'll start reading Jack's books, I said. That's all he ever wanted. The next afternoon, I got a phone call from someone who claimed to be an assistant to an editor of a major corporate type publication that was supposed to support the revolution. It was sponsored entirely by record companies. Mr. Amrat, we would like to know if we could photograph you at the funeral service of Jack Kerouac playing the French horn next to his open casket. The editor would like you to wear a beret and possibly sandals to make it look authentic for our readers. If this is agreeable, we would do a follow-up feature article about you, even though you are currently not with any major record label. When are you planning to be at the service in Lowell? I'm not going to be there, I said. But I understand you were very close. I can't believe you won't be there. Could you tell me why? You just talked me out of it, I said. And I hung up the phone. At my orchestral concert and chamber music concert in Washington at the Corcoran Art Gallery, Ken Pasmatic, my friend from 1947, played in my trio for tenor saxophone, French horn, and bassoon. I had written it in 1958 when living on Christopher Street. Most of it was written when Jack was there, crashing out with Father Rover and poets Philip Lamantia and Howard Hart on my floor. I told Ken I would dedicate the concert and this piece to Jack and his family. That's beautiful, David, said Ken. I remember meeting Charlie Parker with you in your basement apartment and how we played for him in 1952 down there. I feel like I almost knew Kerouac from all you told me about him. Now you're back in Washington and we're playing for him. He may be gone now, but what he wrote will outlive us all. I'll give you trio some extra neshama, that's Yiddish for soul, when we play tonight just for him. I dedicated the concert to Jack, and a few days later, Barney Ross, editor of Evergreen Review, called me up. David, Evergreen Review wants a memorial tribute for Jack. We'd like you to write it. You stayed friends with him till the end. I know he would have warned you to do it. Just be yourself. Don't try to be literary. Just do it the way you speak and tell the readers about him. It's devastating what happened to him, and so many of our great American writers of this century as well. We have to keep his memory alive until all of his books are back in print. Barney was one of the lights of the second half of the 20th century in American publishing. Grove Press made history, not only in breaking the bonds of censorship, but in publishing Jack's Pull My Daisy, works by Genet, and vast numbers of great writers before they were discovered by the public at large. His ex-wife, Joan Mitchell, was an outstanding artist and mentor of mine in Paris in 1954, and when I first arrived in New York. They both loved Jack and his work. I would have done anything for either one of them. I can just pay you $50, enough to cover the cost of one of those enormous sandwiches you make at Igor's Art Foods Delicatessen each day, and give a dinner for you and Melanie at Casey's. But I'd really be grateful if you could do it, and Jack's family would be as well. When can you get it to me? Tomorrow, I said. I'll stay up all night and write it. And if Melanie digs it, I'll meet you at Art Foods Delicatessen at lunch and you'll have it. When Melanie came in and saw me typing, she looked over my shoulder. Stay right there, David. Pardon me. My book fell down. Excuse me, folks. Technical glitch in Technology City here.
And you can't blame that one on me, David.
No, that was my that was the forces of gravity, which I usually try to defy. Okay, just 1 second. Here we are. Thank you. Stay right here, David. Don't move. I should have said that to the microphone. I'll get you supper, a midnight snack, and breakfast. Turn off the phone. Who is it for? Barney Rossett, I said. Perfect, she said. He'll expect the best you can possibly do, and he'll appreciate it. I wrote and rewrote, took cat naps, and kept changing little things throughout the night. I wanted to get it right. It wasn't about me. It was about Jack, from one of the few people who stayed close to him before On the Road came out until his death. I had purposely avoided going to the funeral in Lowell because I didn't want to add to the growing sea of misinformation, mythology, and inaccurate representation of so many of us were about, formed during the rich artistic era of the late 40s and 50s. I didn't have time to write another 465-page book like Vibrations in one night. So I had to telescope all that Jack meant to me in a few pages. I finished it at 3 a.m. and fell asleep in Melanie's arms. I'm taking off work today, she said when she woke up. I'm going to the Art Foods Deli with you and Barney, and we'll go to Casey's tonight to celebrate. Your $50 payment for writing the tribute will be well spent. It's beautiful, honey. Melanie and I went out to lunch with Barney, and when I went back behind the counter to make one of my colossal 2,000-calorie health sandwiches, Barney read the tribute. David, he said, it's perfect. It will be published in our January 1970 issue, exactly the way you wrote it. Maybe you can give me some of your sandwich making recipes so that I can suggest a special diet to all my authors to give them the energy to get their work to me ahead of time. We ate and talked about Jack. Let's go to a movie, David, said Melanie. Don't go upstairs and write music. Let's take one day off this year like normal people. We went to 42nd Street and saw 2 old Humphrey Bogart movies and then went to Casey's. David, you're a special guest tonight, said Casey, the owner. I don't want you running home and getting your horn and sitting in with Freddie Red, at least not till 11 a.m. We have a table for you and Melody. Casey had been an old buddy of mine since 1960, and I always sat at the musician's table next to the piano. I'd gone out with one of his waitresses before I met Melody, and because I played there all the time, I was almost like one of the staff. I had never sat down in the elegant, early dinner crowd part of the restaurant. Uh, are you sure you want us sitting here, Casey? I said. Positive, he said. He brought Melanie and me over to a small table for two. On the top of the table, between two lit candles, was a bottle of champagne in an ice bucket and a note attached. Dear David, from Joan and me, from Evergreen, with thanks to you for remembering Jack Barney. Melanie and I sat down and we drank champagne, and Freddie Red came in at 9 p.m. to play. Damn, David, said Freddie, smiling. You're sitting here with all the white folks. You hit the number? No, Freddie, I said. I just wrote a memorial tribute for Jack Kerouac for Evergreen Review, and Barney Rossett gave us a surprise meal. That's beautiful, said Freddie. We sure miss that cat. I just talked to Sahib Shahab last week when he was visiting some folks in Brooklyn. He was talking about playing on the Pull My Daisy soundtrack. What a righteous cat Jack was. They sure gave up on him when it looked like he was going to make the big dollars anymore, just like Bird. He was too beautiful to be here for a long time. He was such a warm cat. Freddie played, and I sat holding Melanie's hand, closed my eyes, and listened. As I heard Freddie's beautiful improvisations fill the room, I thought about all the times that Jack and I spent together and how he enjoyed life and what an inspiration he was to others. I knew in my heart that his best days were yet to come. And next week, I'm going to read the memorial. Actually, I'll read the memorial now. We still have time. The following is a memorial tribute that I wrote for Evergreen Review, word for word, and I handed it to Barney Rossett on October 24th, 1969. It was called In Memory of Jack Kerouac. I used to see Jack often at the old Five Spot in the beginning of 1957 when I was working there. I knew he was a writer, and all musicians knew that he loved music. You could tell by the way he sat and listened. He never tried to seem hip. He was too interested in life around him to ever think of how he appeared. Musicians understood this and were always glad to see him because we knew that meant at least one person would be listening. Jack was on the same wavelength as we were, so it was never necessary to talk. A few months later, poets Howard Hart and Philip Lamantia came by my place with Jack. They had decided to read their poetry with music, and Jack said he would join in reading, improvising, rapping with the audience, and singing along. Our first performance was in October of 1957 at the Bradda Art Gallery on East 10th Street. It was the first jazz poetry reading ever given in New York. There was no advertising and it was raining, but the place was packed. Jack had become the most important figure of the time. His name was magic. In spite of the carping, whining put-downs by the furious critics and the jealousy of some of his contemporaries for his overnight success, he had written 10 books in addition to On the Road with almost no recognition. But Jack hadn't changed. People's reaction to him was sometimes frightening. He was suddenly being billed as the king of the beatniks and manufactured against his will as some kind of public guru for a movement that never existed. Jack was a private person, extremely shy, and dedicated to writing. When he drank, he became much more expansive, and this was the only part of his personality that became publicized. When the people came to the Bradda Art Gallery, they weren't taste makers, they were friends. A few months later, We began to do some readings at the Circle and the Square. Everyone improvised, including the light man, who had his first chance to wail on the lighting board. The audience joined in, heckling, requesting Jack to read parts of On the Road, and asking him to expound on anything that came into his head. He would also sing when I was playing the French horn, sometimes making up verses. He had a phenomenal ear. It was like playing duets with a great musician. Jack was proud of his knowledge of music and the musicians of his time. He used to come by and play the piano by ear for hours. He had some wonderful ideas for combining the spoken word with music. A few weeks later, jazz poetry became official entertainment, and a few months later was discarded as another bit of refuse, adding to the huge mound of our junk culture. It was harder to dispose of Jack. The same journalists and radio and TV personalities who had heralded him were now ripping him to shreds. Fortunately, they couldn't rip up his manuscripts. His work was being published more widely and more widely read and translated into many languages. In early 1958, all of us went to Brooklyn College, where Jack Philip Howard read. Jack spent most of his time answering the students' questions with questions of his own. He was the down-home Zen master, and the students finally realized he wasn't putting them on. He was showing them himself. If they wanted to meet the author, Jack Kerouac, they would have to read his books. His public appearances were never to promote his books. They were to share a state of mind and a way of being. The only journalist who ever picked up on this was Al Aronowitz. He saw Jack as an artist. January of 1959, the film Pull My Daisy was made. Allen Ginsberg, Gregory Corso, Peter Orlovsky, Larry Rivers, and myself, the Third Avenue All-Stars, as one whipped described us, appeared in what Alfred Leslie directed and Robert Frank filmed. Jack had written the scenario, and after the film had been edited, Jack saw it. Because it was a silent movie, Jack was to narrate it, and I was to write the music afterwards. He, Alan, and Neil Cassidy, who also wrote the lyrics for the title song, Pull My Daisy, for which I had written the music and which was sung on the film by Anita Ellis, all collaborated. Jack put on earphones and asked me to play so that he could improvise the narration to music, the way we had done our readings. He watched the film and made up the narration on the spot. He did it 2 times through spontaneously, and that was it. He refused to do it again. He believed in spontaneity, and the narration turned out to be the very best thing about the film. We recorded it at Jerry Newman's studio. Jerry was an old friend of Jack's from the early 40s, and afterwards we had a party jam session that lasted all night. Jack played the piano, sang, and improvised for hours. In the early 1960s, I used to see Jack when he would come up from Northport to visit town. Once he called up in the morning and told me I had to come over so he could tell me a story. I brought over some music to copy, and Jack spoke nonstop until 8 a.m., describing he had made a trip through North Africa and Europe. It was like hearing a whole book being read aloud. And Jack was the best reader of his own work, with the exception of Dylan Thomas, that I had ever heard. That's a fantastic story, I told him. Sounds just like your books. I try to make my writing sound just the way I talk, he said. His idea was not to display his literary skill, but to have a conversation with the reader. I told Jack about the idea for a cantata about the 4 seasons in America, using the works of American authors. He launched into a travelogue of his voyages around the country and referred to writers I might look into. I took notes and ended up reading nearly 50 books to find the texts. I included a passage from his book, Lonesome Traveler. The concert was at Town Hall in New York City, and Jack wrote me that he couldn't come. It was in the spring of 1965, and he didn't like being in New York anymore. Sometimes he would call me from different parts of the country just to talk, and we continued to write each other. In one letter, he said at the very end, "Ugh, fame is such a drag." He wanted time to work, but found that success robbed him of his freedom. At the same time, he felt that he was forgotten. I told him that all the young people I met when I toured colleges loved his books. To many, he was their favorite writer, but writer means something different now. It was not what was being said, but how it was said. It was content that counted, not style. Jack's message was a whole way of being, and he was becoming more of an influence than ever. Truman Capote dismissed Jack's work as typing. I never heard Jack put down another writer. He went out of his way to encourage young writers. His work reflects that spirit of generosity, kindness, and love. That's why his typing is so meaningful to young people today. Jack was ahead of his time spiritually. Like that of Charlie Parker, Lenny Bruce, and Lord Buckley, his work is constantly being rediscovered. Through knowing Jack, I wrote some of my best music. Without knowing him, I never would have written my book. More important, young people all over the world are reading and rereading his work. His death only means the beginning of a new life for everyone who shares in the joy of knowing him through his books. 25 years later, in October of 1994, I was invited as the featured performer at Lowell Celebrates Kerouac for the first time. A young writer, Attila Guinness, asked if he could reprint the old Evergreen Review Memorial Tribute and have me add an afterword to it. 25 years later, almost to this day, I was asked to accompany that 1969 tribute to Jack. He told me he had an ambivalent feelings about trying to make Jack into a cult figure or creating a mythology about the era. Most of us here at the festival and most of our readers were born after Jack died. Could you write a few paragraphs of what this all means today to go along with what you wrote 25 years ago? And next week, I'll read what I wrote for Attila in his spring 1995 magazine, Demarbiex, and we'll continue with the book, and I'll describe making a recording with next week's featured guest, Jack's nephew, Mr. Jim Sampas, who is a wonderful musician himself, made a great film about Big Sur, and has done an extraordinary number of recordings of Jack's work with well-known contemporary musicians, and I was lucky enough to do some with him myself. And I know that you'll enjoy that because he's also from Lowell, and his aunt married Jack and grew up with him, and he's what they call a primary source, and you can't beat that. So now I would like to introduce our wonderful guests, in case you tuned in late, and they are a stupendous couple who independently are terrific artists and are a joy to be with together. First, Mr. Keir DeLay, and if you look correctly on the internet, if I mentioned his bio, we would be still approaching 11 o'clock. I would be able to mention all the films and theater work he's done. But like Jack, his work speaks for itself, and he is going to read some. And also his wife, Maya Dillon, is an extraordinary actress. They're both going to read some of Jack Kerouac later in the show. And before we do that, we have some wonderful video made in Central Park a few years ago when Keir read part of On the Road at a big public concert and knocked everybody out, including people who had never heard of Jack Kerouac at that time or heard his work being read. And Kira and Maya, also in addition to all their work in theater and films, have read with me on occasion, and it's always a joy to be with both of them. So perhaps, Kira, you could mention something.
We went to New York.
And then we'll be able to show the film. Ladies and gentlemen, here he is, Mr. Keir DeLay, right in Central Park on camera. I just saw that picture. But
It popped up.
I can't accept the award for Keir DeLay, but you got a flash preview of what it's going to be like. Please welcome two outstanding people, Keir and Maya. A joy to have you come on and brighten up our program.
Welcome.
Great to be here. Thank you. But you have more of that when we did that thing in Central Park? Is there more?
I think we can find a little bit more. Yeah. Just a little bit more, maybe 2 seconds.
There was a whole concert. The great Candido was playing as well, the famous conga player who just passed away, and a wonderful Latin jazz orchestra playing behind you. It was just beautiful.
I forgot what the situation was. There were no girls there. They were supposed to meet him at a diner, didn't show up. And we went to his parking lot where he had a few things to do. Change his clothes in the shack and back and spruce up a bit in front of a cracked mirror and so on. And then we took off. And that was the night Dean met Carlo Marx. A tremendous thing happened when Dean met Carlo Marx. Two keen minds that they are, they took to each other at a drop of the hat. Two piercing eyes glanced into two piercing eyes. The holy con man with a shining mind, and the sorrowful poetic con man with a dark mind that is Carlo Marx. And from that moment on, I saw very little of Dean, and I was very sorry too. Their energies met head on. I was a lout compared. I couldn't keep up with them. The whole mad swirl of everything that was to come began then. It would mix up all my friends and all I had left of my family in a big dust cloud over the American night. Carlo told them of Old Bull Lee, Elmer Hassel, Jane, Lee in Texas growing weed, Hassel on Rikers Island, Jane wandering on Times Square in a benzodrine hallucination with her baby girl in her arms and ending up in Bellevue. And Dean told Carlo unknown people in the West like Tommy Snark, the club-footed pool hall rotation shark, and card player and saint. He told them of Roy Johnson, Big Ed Dunkel, his boyhood buddies, his street buddies, his innumerable girls, his heroes, heroines, adventures. They rushed down the street together, digging everything in the early way they had, which later became so much sadder and perceptive and blank. But then they danced on the street like dingle-doties, and I shambled after. I've been doing that all my life, running after people who interest me, because the only people for me are the mad ones. The ones who are mad to live, mad to talk, mad to be saved, desirous of everything at the same time. The ones who never yawn or say a commonplace thing, but burn, burn, burn like fabulous yellow Roman candles exploding like spiders across the stars. And in the middle you see the blue center light pop. And everybody goes, aww. What do they call such young people in Goethe's Germany? Wanting dearly to know how to write like Carlo, the first thing you know, Dean was attacking him with a great amorous soul such as only a con man can have. Now, Carlo, let me speak. Here's what I'm saying. I didn't see them for about 2 weeks, during which time they cemented their friendship to fiendish all-day, all-night talk propositions. Then came spring, the great time for traveling, and everyone in the scattered gang was getting ready to take one trip or another. I was busily at work on my novel, and when I came to the halfway mark, after a trip down south with my aunt to visit my brother Rocco, I got ready to travel west for the very first time. Dean had already left. Carl and I saw him off at the 34th Street Greyhound station. Upstairs, they had a place where you could make pictures for a quarter. And Carlo took off his glasses and looked sinister. Dean made a profile shot and looked coyly around. I took a straight picture that made me look like a 30-year-old Italian who'd kill anybody who said anything against his mother. This picture, Carlo and Dean neatly cut down the middle with a razor and saved half of each in their wallets. Dean was wearing a real Western business suit for his big trip back to Denver. He'd finished his first fling in New York. I say fling, but he only worked like a dog in parking lots. The most fantastic parking lot attendant in the world. He can back a car 40 miles an hour into a tight squeeze and stop at the wall, jump out, race among fenders, leap into another car, circle at 50 miles an hour in a narrow space, back swiftly into a tight spot, hump, snap the car with an emergency so that you can see it bounce as he flies out, then clear to the ticket shack, sprinting like a track star, hand out a ticket, then leap into a newly arrived car before the owner's halfway out, leap literally under him as he steps out, start the car with the door flapping, and roar off to the next available spot, arc, pop in, brake, get out, run, working like that without pause, 8 hours a night, evening rush hours, and after theater rush hours in greasy wino pants with a frayed fur-lined jacket and beat shoes that flap. And now, he bought a new suit to go back in, blue with pencil stripes, vest and all. $11 on 3rd Avenue with a watch and watch chain and a portable typewriter with which he was going to start writing in Denver, in a Denver rooming house as soon as he got a job there. We had a farewell meal of franks and beans in a 7th Avenue Rikers. And then Dean got on the bus that said Chicago and roared off into the night. There went our Wrangler. I promised myself to go the same way when spring really bloomed and opened up the land. And this was really the way my whole road experience began. And the things that were to come are too fantastic.
Okay, did we cut off there?
Not to tell.
Great. Beautiful.
Yay! That is one of the greatest reads and original that some beat freaks have ever seen or heard.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Kier,
Yeah.
thank you again.
Oh.
Not
okay.
only on behalf of Jack, but just on behalf of what you did. And we thank you, Pamela, for having this broadcast so that young people, especially, and young writers, young actors and young readers, and just anybody can see that it's possible to work with other people. And one of the nice things is, first of all, that the band wasn't trying to blow each other and you and Jack Kerouac's words off the stage. They were listening and cooling it. And they're all like super colossal players, but they also understood that our job in life is to share and to collaborate. And that was just such a beautiful thing. I just thank heavens someone filmed that so long ago. And it's on YouTube. And you were just terrific. And you and Maya are terrific to come tonight.
Oh, I'm so glad you played that, because I didn't get to go see that. I missed that reading. So that was a thrill to see a very young version of my husband.
Yeah, was I ever that young?
And that was a few months after we got married.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
Was it?
Yeah.
I thought it would have been.
No, we got married in May. Your mom died in August, and that was the night she died.
Of 98, 99. 99. Yeah,
Yep.
that's right.
I remember coming to your wedding with my son, Adam.
Oh, that's right. You played basketball.
He snuck out during the service and played some basketball and came running in just to catch the very end. But he sends his love. And he said, don't ever tell them. And this part was that I told them years ago, and they were just glad that you came.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
We're gonna run a little piece also of Kier from his most famous film. If you don't mind, Anthony, do you have that ready? It's an interview that you did, I think, in Cannes.
Day after work, I went home, or where we were staying in London, and my wife said, call your agent. Your agent called. So I called him, and he said, are you sitting down? I said, no, why? He said, you better sit down. I said, why? He said, you've just been offered the lead in Stanley Kubrick's next film. I had no idea that I was being considered. I never met anyone from the film. I never met Stanley. Didn't meet anybody. I just suddenly, out of the blue, I had an offer.
Open the pod bay doors, Hal. I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
What's the problem?
I think you know what the problem is just as well as I do.
What are you talking about, Hal?
This mission is too important for me to allow you to jeopardize it.
I don't know what you're talking about, Hal.
I know that you and Frank were planning to disconnect me, and I'm afraid that's something I cannot allow to happen.
Did you, while working on the film, thought that you would be talking about it 50 years later?
No, never.
What were you thinking
Well,
when you were making
you know, can you imagine if you were to have interviewed the actors that were in Orson Welles' Citizen Kane, would they have guessed that they could be studied, they would be studied in film school 75 years later? No, I mean, I knew that because of Stanley, I knew I was in an extraordinary film. I felt it was absolutely extraordinary, but maybe just for that year or for a few years, but how do you know? You could never know a thing like that.
Can you explain it?
I think, you know, this isn't just a science fiction film. The best way that I can begin to explain it is to paraphrase Stanley Kubrick, who said once to someone who asked, "What is this film about?" He said, "How do you explain a Beethoven symphony? You can't. You experience it, and your experience may be completely different than mine because you bring a whole different persona to that experience." At the time it premiered, somebody heard this nun, religious nun, say it was one of the most religious experiences that she had ever had. And then there are atheists who said this is one of the great films. So who's right? They're all right.
They're all right.
They're all right.
Stanley, he didn't want to talk about the meaning of his
No,
film, but
no.
not to you either.
No, because all we had to do was deal with the mundane level of what was going on with these characters. You know, the other actor, Gary Lockwood, playing Frank Poole, and myself playing Dave Bowman, we're dealing day to day with a routine. That's why there's so little dialogue. We've been in space for months. There's not a lot to talk about. We know each other quite well. We don't have to say, how are your parents doing? Or how is it? And what we do every day is the same, even with talking with Hal, the same thing. And it's only when things begin to go wrong that there's some different activity. But even then, there isn't a lot of dialogue. And, well, the whole thing is such a visual experience.
And talking about Hal, the scenes, did you play them with another actor, or how were those?
Well, Stanley was very unsure of the voice for Hal. First, he was thinking about Martin Balsam was a well-known actor at the time. And then Stanley said, no, his accent's too New York. And then he hired a British actor by the name of Nigel Davenport, who was there the first week. And he very quickly said, no, it's too British. So he said, I'll worry about it in post-production. So he just turned to his assistant director. And of course, the crew was entirely British. So his assistant director, Derek Cracknell, was British. And he was the voice of Hal for it. And his voice was a little like Michael Caine. It sounded like this. Oh, I can't do it now. It's all like this. You know what I mean? Oh, yeah, it was a little Cockney accent. You know what I mean?
Very Cockney, yeah. And you had to play with that.
Yes, that took acting. All right, Hal.
Terrific.
You know, you might be interested, as I mentioned there in that interview, there is not a lot of dialogue in 2001. It is mainly a visual experience. Certainly that's true of our section of the film. There was one scene where I had to say a lot of words, which was speaking to mission control about one of the portion of the spaceship which isn't working right. And it was a discussion what we do about that. And it was technological gobbledygook. It was very difficult to memorize. So I was anticipating that I was going to have problems. So I started memorizing. It's really a short speech. For a couple of weeks, I did it over and over and over again. Stanley decided later when he was editing the film, he didn't use it. It was too similar to another scene that he'd done with somebody else. So it was never used. However, this is over 50 years now. I can still do this little speech because of the way I had to learn it. And it was like this. I'll do it quickly. Mission Control is X-ray Delta 1 at 19220 onboard fault prediction center, and our 90000 computer showed Alpha Echo 35 unit as possible failure within 48 hours. Request check your in-ship system simulator. Also confirm your approval our plan to go EVA and replace Alpha Echo 35 unit prior to failure. Mission Control is X-ray Delta 1. Transmission concluded. I didn't do it that fast when I filmed it, but that was it. Yeah.
Sure.
That'll go to those words will die. They'll go to my grave with me.
Well, you know, in music, they say practice makes perfect. And I think it's great that you and Maya both are stage actors. So you can't have something written on the back of your hand or cue cards. You have to learn that stuff and then become that on the spot. I remember when you did The Harmfulness of Tobacco, which is a whole Chekhov monologue. My God, man, I remember seeing that 2 or 3 times that you did it. And each time it was different and each time it was great. So that should be encouraging to people watching. If you're working in the arts, you got to dig into your soulfulness, hang out with gifted people, but you also got to put some time in what we call in the vernacular woodshedding. Because one of Dr. Nelson Harrison, whom I saw was on the show, great trombone player and a PhD psychologist, also could tell people, all the people that we hear who sound so spontaneous and all the actors that we see who are so much fun to watch, boy, they're working hard. They're working for a living. They're working when they're not making a living. And everybody watching could do the same.
Right.
The role that you just mentioned, do you happen to remember anything from that David's talking about?
From which role?
Oh, The Harmfulness of Tobacco.
Oh, I can remember a little bit of I can remember the first page approximately, and it was something like, ladies and so to speak, gentlemen, the suggestion was made to my wife that I should give a popular lecture here for charity. Well, why not? If I must lecture, I must. That's all. It's all one to me. I'm not a college professor. It's true. I can't say I have a university degree, but nevertheless, I have worked on scientific problems for 30 years. Much to the detriment of my health, I might add. 30 years work on strictly scientific problems. I'm very fond of abstract reasoning. From time to time, I even write scientific articles. Well, not strictly scientific, but approximately scientific. Oh, incidentally, I wrote quite a long article only the other day about the harmfulness of certain insects. My daughters liked it a lot, especially the part about bed bugs. But I just read it again, and I threw it away because what this to me it's bed bugs. I mean, we have bed bugs even in the grand piano. That's all I remember.
That's incredible.
Yeah, because I don't think you've done that.
No, I haven't done it for many years.
Yeah.
David was telling me about some of your adventures in the 60s on Cherokee at the Montecito.
Oh, yeah. I bet when I was at the Montecito, that's about the time I first met David.
Yes.
Remember David?
1960. We were all sitting around the swimming pool, and it was all New York actors. I was writing music for a film, and all the New York actors were reading the Sunday New York Times, talking about their work in Chekhov and Shakespeare in the park and off Broadway. And nobody mentioned that they might be working in Wagon Train for a week. I know you and our old departed friend, Martin West, had also known each other in New York, and you would have been in some wonderful plays. And of course, we're an award-winning actor in the theater, which people still remember who were lucky enough to see you. And the beautiful thing is here we are 61 years later, and we're still doing it. And Jack did that up until the day that he died. He was working on a book called Pick. And most artists who are really into it are not doing it so that they can retire and become real estate entrepreneurs. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but those of us that love it know that we're lifers. And Maya, I know you're that way too. And you never gave up or became enraged or bitter. And that's a beautiful, beautiful thing for people to know that there are people like you that are devoted to what they do. Because that way you can not only appreciate art, you can appreciate yourselves, whatever you do in life, and realize if you do better than is expected and love doing it, that's a pretty good thing. And you have a much better life if you have something like that. And also the friends that you make in collaborating together are friends for life. And you can't buy that stuff. Otherwise, everybody with a whole lot of money would be deliriously happy, because if you could buy that, I try to get some of that myself. You can get it for free if you live and act right. And you guys do that. So that's very important for people to know.
But do you remember the Montecito? It was the place, it was the little kind of hotel in downtown Hollywood. It was on Franklin Street, I think it was called, just off Highland Boulevard.
Yeah.
And that's where all the New York actors would stay. Almost invariably, they'd stay at the Montecito Hotel. So you knew half the people that were there. There was a billboard would tell you who's in town at the time. They had your name up there, so you could find out what friends from New York would be there.
That is so cool. So who else was there?
Oh, gosh.
Estelle Parsons was there with her two little girls.
Pardon me?
Then 2 years ago, when she had me working Uncle Vanya, this wonderful, distinguished looking middle-aged woman said, "David, you might not remember me." I hadn't seen her since she was a 3-year-old toddler. Pretty cool. And here she was, a big time, I think, producer. She did all kinds of like terrific work. And Estelle, who is also 60 years older, was still out there acting up a storm and directing. And
oh yeah,
Estelle
she
Parsons,
never stops. Yeah.
Lottie Lehman was there. They were in a production of that wonderful play of the Three Penny Opera, which they were doing out in California. And so many terrific. Martin West, of course, I met at that time, and Buck Henry, whom I've been in the Army with, had come to Hollywood for the first time and was staying there. I couldn't stand it. He was so fun. Mel Brooks was just getting started. And I remember he called me up 3 times and said, "Man, they're playing the 2,000-year-old man on the radio. Turn on the radio." And one of the best lines was when he said, "You raised my hopes and you lifted my spirits." And I know both of you have done that for the 2 people who are seeing you. And that's just wonderful. So again, we thank you for coming. Keir, could you and Maya tell us some things that you're doing now with that wonderful theater group in Connecticut and all the work that
we're doing now? We're in lockdown. We're not doing anything.
They've closed for the moment.
No.
You're talking about the Theater Artists Workshop of Westport, I think.
Yeah.
No, everything because of COVID, everybody's stuck at home. That's what's so wonderful about you doing this. It's a great opportunity to see your friends. You were talking about how you make these great friends in the arts, and you do. But this year has been really tough and really hit the arts tremendously, because all the arts, music, theaters, art galleries, everything is shut down. It's
going to open up again better than ever.
Okay.
All of us who work in that area, by definition, are doing something which we're told is impossible, and it's so hard anyway. But we love it so much, we're never going to let it die. And we're hoping that anybody who's watching this will also feel that way and feel that spirit. And when you think that's what Jack did, so as heartbreaking as it is to see all the people who are suffering and dying and not getting enough to eat and trying to get their vaccines, I'm waiting in line myself. They will not stomp us out. And it just shows the spirit's resilient. And for the fact of both of you coming on and doing this, that's a great thing for everyone's mental and spiritual health.
It's true. You were asking me about the Westport Playhouse, which is where you saw the production of Our Town that I did with Paul Newman.
Oh, it's great.
To Broadway.
Yeah,
I actually did do something. You know, you said, "Are you doing anything?" And I was thinking, no, there's no acting. But they actually put together a radio version of A Christmas Carol. I think you could still hear. It's fabulous. It was like an old time radio show, and you could. I think if you go to the Westport Country Playhouse website, you could probably still access it because it was just. It was beautifully done.
It really was.
And
the actor who played Scrooge.
Paxton Whitehead played Scrooge, and he's just fabulous.
He was brilliant.
It's a really wonderful radio show of A Christmas Carol. So that's all I've been up to. Kier, the last thing you did was in Budapest last year for a new Showtime series that they had to go into hiatus during the pandemic, but I think they started up again. So maybe that will end up on the air.
Who knows?
But other than that, we're just happy to be here with you guys.
Oh, that's so sweet. Kier, you did some radio also, right?
Yeah, in the sixth, let me think.
Yeah.
I think it was the CBS
Mystery Theater.
The CBS Mystery Theater of the Air. And it was like, I love doing the radio because radio, in a sense, I have to give radio drama the credit maybe for my having become an actor. When I was a kid, there was no TV. We didn't have television. It was only radio. And they had kids shows from 5 in the afternoon to 6, you know, Superman and Tom Mix and all these wonderful shows. But then the later dramas for the adults in the evening, I fell in love with. And one thing about radio is that you used your imagination. You could do anything. You didn't have to build a set. It was in your head. And that was what's so marvelous about radio. So having had the opportunity, they kind of reborn, they gave radio a rebirth in the 60s. So I did about 5 or 6 of these radio shows working with some old time radio actors. It was wonderful.
I remember too, maybe you could tell the folks who are seeing this, and I'd love to hear about it again too, since you spent so much of your childhood in Greenwich Village, when jazz and poetry and painting and art and dancers and music and Shakespeare in the Park and all this stuff, by a miracle, kind of happened and everybody hung out with one another. Before we met, and then when you lived in San Francisco when poetry was in flower, you were there during all of that. And maybe you could just say a little bit about what it was like, because you were actually there.
Well, yeah, I grew up in Greenwich. Let's see, I think I lived in. My parents. I was born in Cleveland, and my parents moved to open a bookshop in Greenwich Village on University Place between University Place between 8th Street and 9th Street, and but they couldn't find a place nearby to live, so they commuted from Astoria. So we lived in Astoria, Queens, and they would commute every day to Greenwich Village. But then 2 years later, they found an apartment right around the corner from the bookshop. So when I was 5 years old, I moved into Greenwich. I moved my parents into Greenwich Village, and I thought I'd died and gone to heaven, because what a wonderful place to grow up. And Washington Square was my playground. I was there almost every single day. And I lived in Greenwich Village from the age of 5 to the age of 12 or 13. Then my parents, this is the downside, moved to New Jersey. They continued to run the bookshop, but my mother commuted to the bookshop. My father got a job selling greeting cards. Anyway, so I didn't get back to Greenwich Village, so I went to drama school. That's where I lived. I went back and lived only about 2 blocks from where I had grown up. I lived at 39 East 10th Street, which is between University Place and Broadway, right near the old, that big church there on the corner of Broadway, Grace Church. And yeah, and then I went to drama school uptown. I just took the subway every day to drama school, which is called the Neighborhood Playhouse, where I worked with Sandy Meisner and
Martha Graham.
Martha Graham was our dance teacher. Martha Graham.
Okay, I have to tell you something. I noticed in that video of you with David that you were standing in either a wide first position or near second position. I was going to ask if you were a dancer.
Well, no, I'm not. I can't say, but I did have.
But he had a great teacher.
I did have. We had dance twice a week. We had a little ballet, but mainly modern, with Martha Graham. And,
what can you tell us about Martha Graham?
Oh, she was, just to be in her presence, she was an extraordinary woman in every way. I mean, I feel that I was such a lovely man to have been blessed to have experienced Martha Graham for 2 years. And we had her, I don't remember exactly, it was once or twice a week, we had Martha Graham. She had an assistant on the other day, but we had her at least and maybe twice a week. I can't remember exactly, but it was extraordinary. She was not to be forgotten.
That's beautiful. You know, it was really nice when either of you leaned forward a little bit, because in Zoom, everything gets so small. Yes, okay. It was nice when you talked to lean forward. Not to like leave you stuck there, but it was nice with the leaning forward a bit. And can you tell us something about Sanford Meisner?
That was enough. Everything I am as an actor was helped to be released by that man. He was brilliant. You know, you hear about who's the Actors Studio guy, Strasberg. I'm a member of the Actors Studio, and so I did experience Strasberg, but nobody came close, from my point of view, to Sandy Meisner. Sandy Meisner opened the doors to everything I am as an actor. He gets 100% credit. The only thing beyond Sandy is just the experience of acting as the years went by. Hopefully you get better and better at it. But the seeds were planted. The seeds that have become the actor that I am were absolutely due to Sandy Meisner. He was brilliant. I was very lucky to have two brilliant teachers there. Yeah.
Well, Davey, you were in that area with Kazan and that whole split. What can you tell us about the theater and these guys?
I lived right around the corner from where Keir spent so many years. I was the 6th Avenue, first on the Lower East Side, then 114 Christopher Street, where I met Estelle Parsons when she was in Three Penny Opera at the old theater across the street. And since I was a friendly type of person and desperate, they used to let me for free, and I saw her 20 times. And when I comment just 2 years ago at the Actors Studio about the performance that she gave in 1958, playing one of the 3 roles she played, when she had her teeth blacked out, and her daughter remembered that from when she was a little girl. And I was fortunate enough to work for Shakespeare in the Park, playing with Charles Mingus, hang out with the painters at the old Cedar Tavern, which was about half a block from where Keir spent those formative years. And actors and musicians and poets and painters all got together. I met Kerouac at a bring your own bottle party at a painter's loft, and all the musicians and poets and painters and street people. Our mantra for the weekend was, "Where's the party?" The reason being that the party was, you would bring a bottle of wine or some Dr. Brown's black cherry soda or some potato chips or a dance step or a poem or an instrument or just your own adorned self. Look for romance, enlightenment, happiness, have a good time. And the painters who couldn't get into the Sidney Janis Gallery or one of the 3 or 4 other big time art galleries would put their paintings 10 feet up in the air on their huge ratty lofts where they lived, so people wouldn't pour drinks on them or burn them with cigarette butts. And they would have an art show combined with a tremendous party. And everyone who had a day job, which was just about everyone, would know that on Friday night and Saturday night, it was party time. And it was so much fun. And there was no thing called the Beat Generation or anything. There was no name for that. There were no T-shirts. There were no record sales. There was no folk boom. There was no nothing except what there was, which was better than anything you could ever buy or brand or merchandise. It was just called real life. And that's been going on since the first people who lived in caves decided they would have their own entertainment. That's why the Lascaux cave paintings, 25,000 years later, are still relevant. People pay money to go all the way to southern France, pay to go into the cave and see what those young men and women did on the walls. And no one, to our knowledge, has ever asked for a refund.
By the way, David, you mentioned the Cedar Tavern.
Yes.
The Cedar Tavern was directly across the street from my parents' bookshop.
I know.
Directly across the street. Because it was on University Place.
Yeah, that was the place where poets and painters and
yeah.
And I meant to say that Jack Kerouac, when he was going around with Dodie Muller, and we had Dodie's daughter on, and she and the painters kind of took everyone under their wing, and Jack got interested in paintings and became an accomplished painter himself as a result. And all of us were interested in other people's work and what we did. And we would have Shakespeare in the Park. I started with them in 57 in the park, the first 12 years. All the actors would come down afterwards, and we go to loft parties and jam sessions, and they would read. And they had painters' bands who also played music, and everybody kind of appreciated everyone else. So when I met you at the Montecito, that was like being in that spirit. It was California, not New York, but it's not geography, it's spirit. And that spirit of collaboration. And I feel that very strongly now with all the misery and hard times that are happening. There's a lot of good spirit out there too, that somehow things are going to move on, and we need each other and respect each other. So it's just so wonderful. Both of you could be here to share some of that spirit, because that's stronger than anything and more lasting.
Yeah.
Keir, may we ask you the name of your parents' bookshop, and perhaps how did this bookshop affect you? Did it make you a reader?
It was called the Modern Bookshop. And it was a semi-basement shop between 8th and 9th Street. And the wonderful thing about it was that when I went to the neighborhood playhouse, my parents by that time were living in New Jersey, so they didn't have an apartment. There was no place for me to stay. So what they did was the bookshop by that time, they'd torn that building down where their bookshop was, and it moved around the corner onto 10th Street. So the bookshop now is between University Place and Broadway on 10th Street. I think it was 39 East 10th.
Right.
They turned the rear behind. There was a huge area they never used in the bookshop. So they turned the back part of the bookshop that no one saw into a little apartment for me. So I lived in the bookshop. And for the 2 years I went to drama school, and for another year or so afterwards, when I had no money, it didn't cost me any rent because my parents were paying the rent because it was a bookshop. So, and I was going to auditions and trying to get agents to send me out for things. I didn't have to pay rent. I just lived in the bookshop. And
that's like Shakespeare & Co. in Paris. That's incredible.
I had a lot to read when I wanted to.
Do you remember the Brada Art Gallery and Tanagers? They were all in all those little art museums were on that part of East 10th Street as well. Yeah. Maybe West 10th. They might have been on the west side of Fifth Avenue.
I think they may have been.
That's where we did the first jazz poetry readings, and we go to the Cedar Tavern afterwards to celebrate.
Right.
God, what a nexus, that area with you all there. And
Sorry, I was very lucky in my life because I got to live in a place that's so as exciting and wonderful as Greenwich Village. And then I lived from 1954 to 1956, I graduated. I had gone to a prep school, a Quaker coeducational boarding school where I went back years, and then they had a wonderful drama program there. This is before I went to the Playhouse. I was a high school kid, but they had a wonderful drama program for a high school level. And so I was very active in drama in the high school. And so
some of the alumni include Stephen Sondheim. So
yeah, Sondheim,
that's the kind of school it was.
Yeah, Susan Sondheim went there. Blythe Danner was there. She and I ended up on Broadway, little knowing that she didn't know, but I remember visiting the school. I was called back because by that time I'd done a few films and they wanted to honor me. And I saw this high school kid. It turned out to be Blythe Danner in this high school production. And she was the best thing at. So later on, I was able to go up. Blythe, you probably don't remember me, but
this is first day of rehearsal on Broadway for Butterflies Are Free.
I said, I saw you. We both went to George School, so on. It was great. But the other place that I lived for 2 years before I went to the drama school was I lived in North Beach in San Francisco, which is Greenwich Village, which is the Greenwich Village of San Francisco.
Sure was.
I thought I was there for the rest of my life. I fell in love with San Francisco.
And were you going to City Lights up there?
Yeah, he told me it was the first year it opened. So you definitely went to City Lights.
City Lights Bookshop had been open probably for about 6 months before I moved in the area.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And did you meet ever Allen Ginsberg? Actually, Carlo Marx you're reading about for the audience is Allen Ginsberg.
Did I meet who? I'm sorry.
Allen Ginsberg.
Allen Ginsberg.
Or did you go to any poetry readings at City Lights?
Never did. No, unfortunately. But,
may I make a leap and ask you about the film you're in, The Thin Red Line?
Oh yeah, Thin Red Line was. Oh gosh, that was famous author. God, help me out.
Oh.
Jones is his name. Jones.
Leroy Jones.
No. Yeah.
He wrote the most famous book.
But didn't you meet him on a barge in Paris?
No. I met him later, but oh gosh.
But an interesting thing that Keir has told me about Thin Red Line is even though it's a big war movie and it all takes place in a jungle, they filmed it in a park in Madrid.
In Madrid, the whole film was filmed in a park in Madrid. It was supposed to be one of the islands in the South Pacific.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah. Oh, I can't.
Is the author not James Jones?
James Jones. Yes.
Yes.
This is James Jones, who's most famous. Well, the Thin Red Line was not his most. From Here to Eternity. He wrote From Here to Eternity.
Mm-hmm.
And he wrote The Thin Red Line.
And then what about Terrence Malick?
Well, it's interesting because I saw Terrence Malick's version of it, which is a color version. Keir's is an old black and white one. I've seen both of them. And you would not know it was from the same source because they took the novel and they it's like the guy's looking at the elephant and one is describing it as tree trunks and the other one is saying, no, it's like a snake. You would not know it was the same story. So if anybody's seen the Terrence Malick one, go see Keir's because it's a totally different.
And wonderful
totally
actor
different.
I got to play with, who she was
brilliant.
Jack. No. Oh God.
Yeah.
Names don't stick in your head when you get to my age the way they used to. Boy, oh boy.
Can I ask you a question, Maya? You mentioned a film that I didn't know about, and you looked up the title. I want to write it down, and I'm sure people, the one that is now going to finally be shown.
Oh yes, I have a small part in a film called Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always, and it's just a beautiful film. It's making a lot of critics' 10 best lists for films of 2020. Of course, nobody's seen it because everything shut down right when it was going to be premiered in New York, and. But I think it's available. Actually, we watched it on Amazon. So Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always. It's a teenager's journey when she gets pregnant and is stuck in a little Pennsylvania town and trying to deal with being a high school student and pregnant. And it's so beautifully done.
Yes, it is.
Anyway, I highly recommend it.
Excellent. We're going to look for that.
Yeah.
May we say hello to James Canary? Wizzy, are you there?
Yep,
Yes, I'm here.
Hello.
Hello, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Great to hear him read Kerouac. It's fantastic.
Isn't it beautiful?
Yes. That was you did that where? Was that, you said in Central Park?
You know the big mall that they have,
The band shell.
The band shell in Central Park?
Yes,
That's where it
okay.
was.
Okay, yeah. Great.
August 1999.
Did you ever hear anyone land the Roman candles line like that, Jim?
No, that's really incredible.
Yeah.
I was waiting for that.
Singular.
What did your parents' bookshop specialize in? Was there any particular area that they?
Oh, it was a general bookshop. They even had, I don't think these things exist anymore, but they had a section of the bookshop that was a rental library. So that if there was a hot book out and everyone was lined up at the public library, you'd go to one of these private bookshops and you could get it quite quickly. And so my parents had a rental library, and then they had the front part of the shop was all new books, and they had greeting cards, and it was a general bookshop.
And when you were living there, did you have any particular bedside reading or a book that was next to you often?
I'm sure I did, but I don't remember.
He is still an incredible reader. I mean, he puts me to shame because he goes through books. He just devoured Obama's new book, which is 750 pages, and he read it in under a week. So Ron Chernow, who wrote Hamilton, is a friend of ours through his cousin, who's a fabulous artist, Ann Chernow, who was Martin West's partner for the last 20 years. And Martin was an old friend of David's too, who unfortunately passed away last December 31st. Anyway, Keir read, I didn't quite make it all the way through Hamilton. Keir read Hamilton, he read Grant. We're now looking forward to Ron Chernow's next book, which is going to be, oh gosh, what's he working on? Mark Twain.
Oh yeah, that's his next book.
Yeah, but I'm sure it's going to be a doorstop as well, because he's an incredible writer anyway. Yes, Keir, I guess it's growing up in a bookshop has rubbed off, because you will always find Keir with a book, and sometimes more than one. He'll be reading one during the day, and then he's got his night book next to the nightstand. So Keir is an incredible reader.
That sounds like you, Wizzy.
Yeah, can't help it.
One time I showed Jim Canary something, and he was scrolling it on the computer so fast. I said, it was a screenplay, and I said, do you understand how to read a screenplay? And he knew every word. He just went like, brrrt. You're a speed reader too, Jim.
Well, for folks that don't know, Jim takes that scroll, which is 100 and how many?
Oh, it's 119 and something change.
Single space typing, and Jim preserves that. And James Earsay, bless his heart, bought it for $2.4 million.
Holy moly.
And instead of putting it in a vault, which he's entitled to, I mean, he paid for it, he hired Jim Canary, whom you see tonight, to roll it up, unroll it, see that the temperature was good. And it has been like Jack was for most of his life, on the road ever since. And I've been in 6 or 7 different places with Jim overseas and in London and all over the United States. And Jim takes care of that scroll, and that's pretty remarkable. So when anybody ever accuses any of the readers of being a bookworm, that's the kind of worm to be.
How long is that scroll, Jim?
It's
Have you
it is really at nearly 120 feet, just short of 120 feet.
Wow.
Yeah. He typed so fast he could type 100 words a minute and didn't want to break up his thoughts. So he just didn't want sheets, 8.5 by 11. So he joined 8 long sections of paper that he had cut out of a roll, wide enough to fit in the typewriter, and had at it.
Wow.
Wow.
And Jim is at the Lilly Library in Indiana. So that's his home away from home.
Yeah. Plenty of
Does
books.
anybody ever get to see this scroll? Do you
Oh, yes.
you're the caretaker, do you carry it around? I mean, is this a
Jim didn't want to just keep it to himself, so he thought it should go and be at other libraries, other museums, and create a happening around it. So that's why things like David would come and play, local poets and musicians would come and do events during the time it was there. Books from their library would be put on display that related to the scroll. So it just creates a happening wherever it goes, which is just wonderful.
mhm. Is it connected to sort of wooden dowels or anything?
No, it was on just like cardboard tube when Jack carried it around, but it's now on 2 plexiglass spools, and then you roll it out. And Jim, the owner, had a display case made that is in 12-foot sections, modules, which we can ship any multiple of 12 feet. So, for example, in Denver, we had a 60-foot display case there. And then halfway through the exhibit, I went out again and rolled out the second half so they could read the entire scroll.
Wow.
Which was great because someone was teaching that semester beat literature, and the students got to come and they were actually able to read the entire novel on the scroll. It was funny when the last day somebody rode a motorcycle from LA and they showed up just all worn out to come and see it. And I had just finished rolling it up and put it in the box, packed up. And the director said, I'm sorry, it's put away. And I said, the guy's come a long way. He's come to see this and pretty dedicated. I said, if it's okay with you, if we were in a private room in the back, I'd love to show it to him. I mean, I didn't unroll it much, but I opened up the case and he got to see it and be there with it. It made his day. And it's just, that's the kind of thing that it's there for people to see and to experience and to share, not to be just locked away and involved.
And that's a wonderful thing to know about. So when we're told by cultural authorities that art, literature, music, books, writing, ballet, dance, theater are dead, that only means the people who think that way are on the path to early departure themselves. And since premature expiration is highly overrated in our culture, it's good to know that theater, art, music, literature, painting, writing have been here a long time and are going to be here for a long time. And for all of you who feel drawn to it, when your career counselors tell you you're wasting your time, give them all respect for their sage advice, but hang out with somebody else.
Gotcha.
Should we go to some Q&A for a few minutes?
Looks like Hassan we have raising his hand, and then Joyce right after.
Thank you.
Hassan.
Well, actually, hello, David. Hi, and hello, Keir, if I may call you by your first name. I am in awe, actually. And I think David knows, I've known David for about 10 years, and I consider David a very good friend, but I think he also knows that I'm also in awe of him because, I mean, I wanted to be the Beat Generation when I was 19, 20 years old. And before that, before I'd ever heard of the Beat Generation, I wanted to be an astronaut because 2001 was absolute favorite movie. I mean, I wanted to be David Bowman. I don't think I wanted to come back as a baby, but Right today would probably tell you that I do come back as a baby sometimes. Okay, anyway, I had to sort of, yes, okay. So I'm just going to purely fanboy here, just ask you a trivial question. I mean, when you were, did David Bowman, did you imagine that David Bowman considered Hal a friend? I mean, 'cause that last scene is beautiful when you're unplugging him. I mean, it's just.
Oh yeah, as a matter of fact, the last scene when I was working on it, where I take Hal apart, reminded me. What's the
Of Mice and Men.
You know, you remember in Mice and Men?
Lenny.
Remember
Yes.
And one is the
Lenny is the sort of simpleton
the simpleton character
who's accidentally murdered the girl, and the gang is coming to string him up.
And the lead actor, which was played by who played that?
Burgess Meredith played
movie. The friend that he was the person they were
Anybody's
always
seen the
together.
movie, yeah.
And the difficulty he had, he was going to put his friend out of his misery. He was going to shoot him because he knew that he'd be strung up, and to avoid that terrible thing, he was going to put him out of his misery. So he's talking about the things they're going to do together, and while they're discussing that, he's got the pistol behind him. In a way, taking Hal apart was that way, because if you remember, the first time you see me, more or less, in the film, I'm drawing something, and he wants me to share it. So he's another crew member.
Yeah.
Like, there's just, that's it. He's another crew member.
Yeah. And Hal recognizes him.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. No, it's a beautiful interaction you have with him. And did the British guy, did he actually sing Daisy too? Or was that all done post-sing?
No, we didn't have the,
because you react. The reaction is so well. You say yes.
Probably he probably sang it also. I'm guessing.
It's a wonder. I just shake when I watch that. I watch the movie about once every year or two or so. So thank you for that movie. Thank you so much. It thrills me to be able to say this to you.
Thank you for your comments.
Thanks. Yeah, and thanks David for having. Okay, I'm going to mute myself now.
People probably don't know Hassan and his wonderful wife, who is sitting next to him. I said, verknugen dich noch einmal zu sehen, besonders in diese empfindliche Umgebung. She's German is by bad Bahnhof Deutsch. That means the ones that you learn in the railroad station. At any rate, you're the person, and I mentioned on about 4 shows already, is responsible for Joyce Johnson finally coming back to her alma mater after she won the National Book Award in 1972 and finally got honored by Barnard College by Hassan Mele, who's a distinguished scholar. And I've been to his school. He's a great teacher, and students not only love him, but they actually study, read, write, and learn something. As his wife also is serious scholars who actually are scholars and teach people how to become scholarly, which is so rare in this, and we need more of that. But it was because of Hassan that Joyce Johnson was finally acknowledged in the college that she went to about 50 years afterwards for the very first time. He got her through the trapdoor into the place, and she never said anything about it, and he never said anything, but it was a French studies program. And he's also written a terrific book himself, and like myself appreciates, and Pamela appreciates too, Joyce's magnificent biography of Jack, and also the fact that she was the first scholar we know of who acknowledged Jack's mother as being a very important, brilliant person rather than just a stereotype or a moron. It was pretty dreadful, but all good things come to those who wait. And Hassan, I want you to know you're appreciated by a lot of us for what you're, not only what you did, but what you're doing.
Well, thank you. It was the Barnard Center for Translation Studies, and they asked me to talk about Kerouac because I was doing his French English stuff. And Joyce, I'd been friends with Joyce for a while, and she told me she'd never been invited to Barnard. So then then I just got this invitation from these people I knew. I said, well, can I bring a biographer with me? And they said, yeah. And it was Joyce, and we came, and it was magic. And I remember the Village Voice ranked us above Paul Muldoon that week for literary events. I was proud of that.
That's incredible. May I ask, before we go to Joyce, we have 2 amazing couples, Maya and Keir and Hassan. It's so nice having you all the time. How do you keep your relationship so healthy and alive? Can you give us some advice?
And this is, do you want to go first? You go first.
Oh, you want us to go first? How do we keep it amazing? I don't know. We just like each other's company. And we've actually done about 5 or 6 plays together.
Yeah.
And I don't know.
Which plays? What are some of the plays you did?
Well, we did, we've done 2 productions of Death Trap. One started 2 weeks after we got married. So, and in Death Trap, he plays the lead and he kills off his wife at the end of Act 1 every night. So,
but the first play we ever did was
that's true.
Noah Coward's Private Lives.
Yeah.
So that was the first play we did. Then we've done others.
We did a tour of Death Trap in Ireland for 4 months. We did.
Are either of you Irish?
With a name like Maya Dillon, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how was that to be in Ireland working together?
Oh, it was
fabulous, just fabulous. We had a wonderful producer, and
I'm of Irish descent also. So
Yeah.
Delay is an Irish. People think it's French, but it actually is a County Cork name. Yeah.
We go, we go way back. My ancestors came over in the early 1800s. Actually, the Dillons. My mom did the genealogy, and I couldn't figure out why my ancestors were already here in the 1820s. I knew they were already here. And the famine, a lot of people came over in the famine, which was much later. That was the 50s, 60s, 1850s, 60s.
47.
Okay, well, it turns out the Dillons came over to fight the British as mercenaries during the Revolutionary War.
She is a descendant. Her ancestor was
well, on my mom's side, because it's James Franklin, which is Benjamin Franklin's older brother, the one that he hated, who ran the newspaper, and he ran away from anyway. That was
Benjamin Franklin's older brother is her ancestor.
But that's good that I'm descended from James Franklin, because Benjamin Franklin never married. So if I was descended from one of his descendants, that would be a little illegitimate, but I'm legitimately descended from his older brother, James. So I've got a lot of revolutionary spirit here.
Extraordinary.
For the good side. Yeah.
Can we leap to Hassan and his wife and ask how they keep their relationship so happy and beautiful? Is it intellectual stuff?
Yes. Yeah, my wife's name is Dorothea.
Dorothea, hello.
Here I know, but I could.
Thank you.
Dorothea is going to talk. I've already talked enough, so she's going to tell us how this works.
In the revolutionary spirit that was just invoked, it means that if you are 2 academics, you decide never to read each other's works, and then it's beautiful.
We never sit in on each other's classes either. But she's the better teacher, so I'm always bugging her. I say, how do I teach this?
So that's the secret.
Well, I have to say, I have done many Irish plays. My first Broadway play was with Barnett Hughes in 1978. It was called Da. It won a bunch of Tonys on Broadway. And then I did a bunch of other Irish plays.
She's been nominated for a Tony.
Well, anyway, I'd never been to Ireland. I mean, it was just in my heart. And Keir took me to Ireland for the first time. Now I've probably been about 10 times with Keir, because he just loves going there. But we had been dating. He took me to Ireland because I'd never been there, and he'd already been there about 17 times by then, because he loves the country so much.
Yeah, I do.
And he proposed to me in Ireland, and I thought, you know what? If I can be in a car, because we drove all over the place, in the rain, and be confined in this short, this little space for 2 weeks with this guy, and we didn't fight. We got along great. I thought, if I can be in this car, in the rain, in this foreign country, I can be with him the rest of my life and be happy. So I said yes.
That's so beautiful. Can we go to Joyce Johnson's question now, please? You there,
Joyce Glasgow?
Yes, Joyce Glasgow.
I'm keeping on with my Joyce Johnson. I keep doing that. Hi, Joyce.
Hi. This is great tonight. Anyway, first, I have two questions. Keir, what was it like being a child growing up in a bookstore? I'm wondering if you have any kind of strong recollections, magical experiences that are kind of unusual because kids don't get to be in bookstores all the time. And I'm just wondering, either with books or with people that came in or with your parents or anything that you recollect that a magical or, and if you had any cats, bookstore cats.
Any bookstore what?
Cats.
C-A-T?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
No, they didn't have any cats in there, but it was a very, I got very used to being there. I felt always so at home. At home to me meant being in a bookshop. That was like the feeling of belonging and being at home among all these beautiful books. There wasn't any particular persona.
You told me you used to stand out in front of the bookstore on a cardboard box giving speeches, didn't you?
Well, I would set up a little shop in front of the bookshop on University Place, right in front of there. And what did I used to sell? Little pamphlets or little, I don't know. I sort of set up a little store.
So instead of a lemonade stand.
Yeah, that was my lemonade stand. Except
selling books.
I think they were pocket books. I think I sold pocket books.
That is adorable.
I borrowed from my parents. Yeah.
And what'd you like to do with your pocket change?
Oh, I can tell you, my pocket change always bought comic books. I loved certain, Superman and what was the one with with Porky Pig and all that. I love
Bugs Bunny. No.
Yeah, Bugs Bunny. I mean, that was how I used my change. It was buying comic books. That was not exactly the intellectual thing that you might expect from a bookstore, but
you don't have to be an intellectual at 6 years old.
No,
it's
true.
okay.
Okay.
And then the other thing I wanted to ask is, before you found out, Maya, that if you could be in the car together all that time, that you could be together forever. I was wondering, when you first met, what was it about the two of you that were drawn to each other and that really felt that this was the one for you? That's
interesting because we had met in the spring, May of 95. And it was at Symphony Space on 95th and Broadway doing selected shorts. I don't know if you've ever listened to actors reading short stories on NPR radio. It's a program called Selected Shorts. And they usually had 3 actors for an evening, usually from I think 6 to 8 or 6:30 to 8:30. And 3 actors would read short stories, and Isaiah Sheffer, who was the producer and fabulous artistic director, he would also read and introduce people. And the funny thing is, Keir remembers, like a photograph, his first sight of me. I was on stage doing a sound check.
Let's hear it from Keir.
Okay, the first.
No, you can.
No, okay.
I'm not sure.
I remember the first sight I had of him.
Okay, you tell the story better.
Big blue eyes. I saw him when I came back to the green room, and he was sitting there. And I remember during the intermission, just chatting with him, and my little heart is going pitter pat. And then he starts talking about his daughters, and I went, darn, oh well. So
yeah. What was the sound check?
I was standing at the microphone, and you said you saw my long
hair.
Yeah.
Let's hear it, Keir. You saw her long hair.
Well, I just saw this beautiful creature who had this long hair that was almost, the way I remember it, she said it wasn't that long. The way I remember it went down to her waist. It was this beautiful hair.
Well,
Probably as long as yours. Anyway.
It was about your length.
But
well, then at the end of the evening, he mentioned that his wife was going to be directing him in a production of Private Lives in summer stock, and they hadn't cast the part of Amanda, and I had actually turned down a production at the Guthrie Theater, which is a big deal theater, because the director wanted me to play the secondary female, which is Sybil, and I didn't want to play Sybil. I wanted to play Amanda. And so Keir's late wife, Susie, called my agent, set up a meeting. We hit it off. I adored her. She was a fabulous woman, a fabulous director. And so we spent the month of August up in New Hampshire working on Private Lives, and it was one of those summer stock things, 2 weeks rehearsal, 2 weeks run, in, out, and we actually got a fabulous review in the Boston Globe.
Yeah.
So that was where I fell in love with actually the way Keir treated his wife, besides falling in love with this amazing man. So
yeah, it wasn't that we found each other very attractive, but I was happily married, and my late wife, my wife passed away 3 years later, unfortunately, and I suddenly remembered Maya. I couldn't forget.
Well,
Maya.
he had sent his late wife Susie did not want anybody to know that she was dying. Unfortunately, that summer before she died, I was doing a summer stock tour to the Westport Country Playhouse. I was doing a play called Angel Street, and I called their phone number to invite them because I knew they lived in Westport, and I didn't hear anything, and I just figured they were out of town, because we'd sort of kept in touch a little bit. Susie had invited me to Keir's surprise 60th birthday party, which is where I first encountered David Amram, because David played music at that party. So that was the last time I'd seen Susie and Keir. And the next summer is when I invited them to see me in the show that was in the town they lived in, and I never heard a word. And that's because Susie was dying. She had cancer.
Was very ill at the time.
And 6 months later, she passed away. He sent out a letter to people who had known and loved her. And then I invited Keir to a play that I was doing off Broadway with Reed Birney, a wonderful play by Jeff Sweet. And Keir came to see it, and that was our first date.
Yeah.
So.
That's a beautiful and sad story. That's so beautiful.
Well, it's, he was still in mourning for Susie, but you know how a lot of women feel like they're competing with, well, I think Noel Coward wrote a play about that called Blithe Spirit. I never felt that because I knew Keir, I knew he was in love with me, but he never had to suppress his grief because I loved her too. And so there was
yeah, you did.
Anyway.
That's beautiful.
Yes. And we're very close to Keir raised his stepdaughters. He raised them from age 3 and 6, and they live in England, which is where they were born. But they're very close. They're our family.
Yeah, we can see them regularly as much as we. Well, we
can't see them right now.
Not right now, but
we spent Christmas with them last year.
Yeah.
Really nice. That is such a beautiful story. We are going to have some reading coming up kind of soon. So I'd love to go to Norton Wisdom. Norton, are you there painting? Norton? There you are. I saw, did you unmic yourself, Norton?
Hi, Angel.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes. What are you
No.
thinking about, Wisdom?
Well, now let's see. Can you see what I'm thinking about? Hang on a second.
Well, we want to see you for a second, but
No.
wow.
Is any of this visible?
Yes. That's fantastic.
And there's Jack reading, of course, in outer space. And there's the obelisk, and he's about to turn off Hal right there. And there's the future of mankind after what we went through Wednesday. Hopefully we'll be born again.
Oh boy.
And here I think everybody can recognize these people right now. We've seen them on TV recently. Anyway, that's it. I just, again, can't tell you how much I enjoyed the tour you guys took me on.
So we have Jim Canary's going to read a small thing, and there's a couple small quotes
was that myself?
That was, I'm not meaning to cut you off, Norton. I'm only letting you know what's up because we're getting short on time. Jim Canary's going to read a small paragraph, and if he would like, Anthony has 3 one-sentence quotes of Kerouac, and then we will have Mia and Keir in whatever order you choose. And I would only request that when you read, who's ever reading wouldn't mind leaning forward, because it's then you pop off the screen a little bit. All right.
Okay.
You're up, James. You're mic'd again, love.
On soft spring nights, I'll stand in the yard under the stars. Something good will come out of all things yet, and it will be golden and eternal, just like that. There's no need to say another word. That was from Big Sur.
Bravo.
Anthony, are you there? Sometimes he steps out.
Yeah. Hi.
Oh, hi, love.
Yeah, so I'm gonna throw a curveball right here. So here in Maya, before our time runs out, I'm very curious to know, and this is gonna get a little bit more heady and esoteric, but I feel like you are the guest to ask something like this too. I'm very curious to know about your process artistically and what is sort of your philosophical intention. Like, for instance, with 2001: A Space Odyssey, as we know, Kubrick was very much of the mindset that it should be interpretive at the end. However, there is a very famous phone call in the the cinephile spaces between him and Japanese filmmaker Jun Ichiyao in 1980, where Kubrick breaks down essentially, what the meta narrative of like everything that was going on as your character was going through the end of his life cycle in this sort of museum-esque, thing. Was this something that you were aware of as you were doing that? And also when you are portraying, and this is a question for both of you, when you are portraying artistically these characters, is there that sort of, do you think generations down the line, like how I portray this, what I am saying here is going to influence how other people think and like literally experience reality themselves? And with that, I'll segue with one quote from Jack. There was nothing to talk about anymore. The only thing to do was go. And I leave it to you.
Well, no, I don't think, as an actor, you don't think about what effect it's going to have down the line in any way. You're in the moment. I mean, that's the way I was trained, is to be in the moment. There is only the reality of the nowness of existence. And it isn't an intellectual kind of thing that there's another part of you that's sort of out here looking at yourself. You're you're dealing moment to moment with the reality of whatever's going on in the script, and you make it as personal as you can. Becomes, you know, your story in a sense, as much as you can do that.
Yeah, I agree. In fact, as a young actor, I would get in trouble kind of because I was thinking more like a dramaturg or like a director, thinking of the arc of the piece and basically what you're talking about, which is great if you're directing or if you're writing it or dramaturging it. But as an actor, your focus is on your part of the story. And really, it's the director whose job is to shape it in terms of the message that's going out. What you are looking for is the truth of your character and what your character is feeling, what your character is thinking, what the subtext, what's going on underneath. How did you get to this place? And anytime you make an entrance in any play, you're thinking, what did I just come from? We talked earlier about Martha Graham. I studied dance with Bertram Ross, who was Martha Graham's partner for many, many years. And he talked a lot about Martha. And one of the gestures that we would do in class was this arm reaching back and then the arm reaching forward. So this pull of what happened before and the pull of where you're going. And I think it's highly relevant to any acting exercise is what just happened. What is propelling you onto that stage? What's propelling you through that door? What just happened that makes you have to enter? And where are you heading? And sometimes you don't know where you're heading. But that's what you bring on with you is you pack your suitcase full of your history and you make as full a character as you can with whatever the playwright has given you to bring all of that on stage and bring it to life.
Could you read? That's terrific. Could you both read now? Because we were.
Yeah.
Yes, and Nelson Harriman had a comment. He knows all things Pittsburgh. Are you there, Nelson?
Yeah, I'm here. I just wanted to interject. Is Harrison?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, thank you, Pam, for doing this. I learned so much and meet so many people I never heard of before, and then I become instantly your fan. So Maya and Kira, you have another fan in Pittsburgh, and I will be researching you and looking at your movies. I wanted to mention that Martha Graham is from Pittsburgh. We always talk about the great jazz people from Pittsburgh, but Martha was born in Pittsburgh too in 1894.
Yeah.
One other comment I'd like to make is I heard somebody say the other day that we know people tend through their egos to live in the past and the future, but life is really in the now. Now is the time, as Charlie Parker said, as David always quotes. And somebody mentioned that the pandemic that hit the world has forced us to stay in the present moment. Everybody, the whole humanity. So maybe there's a message in there from Mother Earth that we need to find ourselves in the now. That's it.
And do you know what, before you read, if you wouldn't mind me asking, it's like such an obvious question, Kier, but what is it like to carry such a gigantic legacy with one particular film? Mm-hmm.
It's fun. It's taken us all over the world.
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, the example is that interview you showed earlier of me talking about 2001, that was in Cannes. Well, they were honoring the 50th anniversary of 2001, and they brought us over to Cannes Film Festival. And that happens a lot. I mean,
and right before that, we had been in Madrid where Kier voiced Stanley Kubrick in this wonderful original documentary that they did based on the Playboy interview that Stanley did. They had the text, but they didn't have his voice. And so they had Kier reading what Stanley
they had
said.
me read Stanley's voice.
So he's the voice.
That is
Stanley.
super cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for the 50th was the director Chris Columbus? Oh no, Christopher Nolan. Was he
Yes.
involved in fixing that? What did he do?
Absolutely. He spearheaded the new print and he got them to re-release it.
Yeah.
No, he spearheaded the entire thing. So
Yeah, it was Christopher Nolan, myself, and who else was there? Stanley Kubrick's, one of his daughters was there.
and Jan Harlan,
And Jan
Stanley's,
Harling, Stanley's
brother-in-law.
brother-in-law was there.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
we've gone to Australia twice. No, we've and you've gone lots of places before.
As a
we
matter of
met.
fact, the opening of the film in 1968, they flew me to Australia and to Tokyo, and where was the other place? Oh, in Hawaii for the premieres in those three places. So yeah, it's brought me. It's done. It's been an extra. I mean, as I said in that interview, who could ever know that was gonna? When you're filming, you're doing your best. You're in the moment. You're not thinking ahead what's going to happen to this film. You're only. And I loved working with Stanley Kubrick was extraordinary. I mean, if I was raving about working with Sandy Meisner and Martha Graham, Stanley Kubrick is right up there with them in terms of the import, the effect he had on me as an actor at the time. I mean, I was such a fan. I was a huge fan of his. I was in drama school, I mean, as I mentioned, from 1956 to 1958. And in those years, there was a Lowe's Theater near the drama school, and I didn't have any afternoon class that day. And somebody said, "Hey, there's this great war picture down the street with Kirk Douglas. You got to go see it." I said, "Oh, yeah, what's it called?" "It's called Paths of Glory." So I'd never heard of that. So I went down to see Kirk Douglas, and my God, what was I experiencing? That was my first experience of Stanley Kubrick. I couldn't believe my jaw dropped. It was extraordinary. Maybe because it's the first Kubrick film. I mean, I've seen everything he's done, but that was my first experience of his film, and it's affected me. I mean, I think about that film. It's a brilliant anti-war film. It really is brilliant.
Oh, yes. And I was thinking that as far as Sanford Meisner goes, if you wanted to have the ultimate film with the Meisner repeat, which would be, what's the Meisner repeat of 2001?
Well, I'm trying to think.
Open
the Padme door, maybe. Yeah, that's true. I hadn't thought of that. Yeah.
Open the door, Hal.
Have you worked? Are you an actress?
I have been, yes.
You have been.
I did some theater in Paris as well as working here, film and television a little bit. And I first discovered a biography called The Beat Hotel at the English Bookshop, and it was right next to Midnight Express.
Right.
I wondered what was Oliver Stone's reason for adapting that as his first thing. And I'm friends with Oliver. I was in Nixon, and next to it was something called The Beat Hotel. And I had worked for studio heads on scripts, and that was an incredible, like the back of the book. And my theater director was the official translator, Robert Cordier, for Sam Shepard. We got to do his whole catalog for Radio France Culture. And David Mamet, I got to do the first runs in Paris. But that's the, I'm not allowed to call it a book, a biography that brought me to study David. And my theater director co-translated Howl with Jean-Jacques Lebel. And so that's the beginning of my journey, is also in a bookshop.
Great.
I only asked you that question. You seem to know the terminology and talked about the Stanley repeat thing. Anyway.
We got it.
Oh.
And since Kira and Maya were nice enough to take their time to learn some Jack Kerouac to end the program reading Jack, which they planned on doing, and we're 5 minutes overtime, and musicians are punctuality freaks, I would like to invite them to do the beautiful readings from On the Road that they were kind enough to do, and then we can end the program. I want to thank them very much, Maya, Dylan, and Keir DeLay, and Pamela Dickerson, and of course Anthony Demarbiex, and the wonderful Jim Canary and Norton Wisdom. And now we're going to end up hearing Jack Kerouac, and I'll play as I did with Jack quietly behind you. And since Zoom is notorious for being out of sync, I'm going to play as Nelson would do if he had his trombone, very discreetly and unrhythmically, so that it'll just provide sort of a soundscape. And you'll both be glad to know that it won't be too loud because we believe in listening to the music that's already in the words. And thank you both for coming. And now, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. And those of you who are into overtime, we hope we haven't wrecked your sleeping schedule. Please welcome and send in a letter or do something and go to see Maya and Kier if they ever come to the theater to your town. Now, both of you read whatever you plan to read. Thank you.
Who would you like first, David? Which one would you prefer first?
Whoever feels like going first.
Do you want me to go first?
Sure.
Okay. So in America. So in America, when the sun goes down, I sit on the old broken down river pier, watching the long, long skies over New Jersey, and sense all that raw land that rolls in one unbelievable huge bulge over to the west coast, and all that road going, all the people dreaming in the immensity of it. And in Iowa, I know by now the children must be crying in the land where they let the children cry. And tonight the stars will be out, and don't you know that God is Pooh Bear? The evening star must be drooping and shedding her sparkler dims on the prairie, which is just before the coming of complete night that blesses the earth, darkens all rivers, cups the peaks, and folds the final shore in, and nobody knows what's going to happen to anybody besides the forlorn rags of growing old. I think of Dean Moriarty. I even think of old Dean Moriarty, the father we never found. I think of Dean Moriarty.
Bravo.
Bravo.
You want me to go? Yeah?
Yes.
All right.
Yes. Beautiful. Thank
On hearing, shearing. Dean and I went to see shearing at Birdland in the midst of the long, mad weekend. The place was deserted. We were the first customers, 10 o'clock. Shearing came out blind, led by the hand to his keyboard. He was a distinguished looking Englishman with stiff white collar, slightly beefy, blonde with a delicate English summer night air about him that came out in the first ripping sweet number he played. As the bass player leaned to him reverently and thrummed the beat, the drummer, Benzel Best, sat motionless except for his wrists snapping at the brushes. And Shearing began to rock. A smile broke over his ecstatic face. He began to rock on the piano seat, back and forth, slowly at first, and then the beat went up and he began rocking fast, his left foot jumping up with every beat. His neck began to rock crookedly. He brought his face down to the keys. He pushed his hair back. His combed hair dissolved and he began to sweat. The music picked up. The bass player hunched over and sucked it in faster and faster. That's all. Shearing began to play his chords. They rolled out of the piano in rich, great, rich showers. You'd think the man wouldn't have time to line them up. They rattled and rolled like the sea. Folks yelled for him to go. Dean was sweating. The sweat poured down his collar. There he is. That's him. Oh, God. Oh, God, Shearing. Yes, yes, yes. And Shearing was conscious of the madman behind him. He could hear every one of Dean's gasps and imprecations. He could sense it, though he couldn't see. That's right, Dean said. Yes. Shearing smiled. He rocked. Shearing rose from the piano, dripping with sweat. These were his great 1949 days before he became cool and commercial. When he was gone, Dean pointed to the empty piano seat. God's empty chair, he said. On the piano, a horn sat. Its golden shadow made strange reflections along the desert caravan painted on the wall behind the drums. God was gone. It was the silence of his departure. It was a rainy night. It was the myth of the rainy night.
Good night, everybody.